Hey there, it's Dr. Justin Marcagiani. Welcome back to the podcast. We have Evan here today. As usual, today we're going to be chatting about Cryptosporidium specifically, which is a parasite. Parasites, we see in our practice all the time, but today we're going to be putting a laser on Cryptosporidium because we see it quite frequently in patients. Evan sees it in a lot of his patients as well. So we're going to dive into the nitty gritty with crypto, talk about the symptoms, talk about kind of what we do to address it, how we assess it, and common vectors of getting it. So Evan, let's dive in. How are we doing today, man?
I'm doing pretty good. I started the idea of this conversation because every year I look at the Center for Disease Control and Prevention's website, and I just want to see what's the hot topics with them. And this summer they had posted, it was like 3 or 4 different masters in public health who authored this study. And they said during 2009, which wasn't that long ago, to 2017, there's an increase of crypto outbreaks 13% per year. And you and I were kind of chatting off air, and I thought, wow, that's crazy. So just 10 short years ago, people were not getting crypto as much, and now 13% increase every single year. What the heck's going on? And so we could talk about a lot, immune system issues and things that are leading to this, but maybe we should just lay the groundwork a little bit, like what crypto is, how tiny is it, where does it come from, what are the symptoms it causes? Let's dive into that.
Sure. So there's a couple different species that affect humans. Again, the most common one is going to be Cryptosporidium parvum with a P. We also have Hominis, we have Muris, we have Canis, we have Felis. I think Felis is the one that primarily is infected in cats, but there's different variations in it. The major one we see is going to be Cryptosporidium parvum. That's the big one. And crypto, it is affected by temperature. So boiling water can actually help kill it. Freezing can actually help kill it. But the major vector that you're going to get exposed to regarding crypto is going to be water, primarily number one. You're also going to see it in daycares. Daycares are a significant vector as well. You're going to see it hiking, drinking any unfiltered water. People that are on farms that are petting animals. Cows, petting cows are a big one. Infected cattle is going to be a big one. You'll see it with some cats. Anyone that's exposed to human feces, because this infection is going to be primarily spread fecal oral, meaning stool to mouth. So either a human not washing their hands or some level of intimacy, or with animals that, they're not going to be the most clean, right? They're probably licking themselves and they're spreading maybe fecal debris on their body. You pet them and then that gets in your mouth. You can have an infection that way. And then of course the low hanging fruit, me being an avid water skier and an avid boater, maybe lakes and ponds. Those are the big vectors. Then of course daycare. So you send your kid to daycare, who knows what's happening there, because kids obviously have issues with their bowels and changing diapers and all that. So there may be some level of fecal debris that's contaminated, and then the water. So those are going to be the big vectors that you have the highest risk of getting infected from.
It's incredible how small this is. I really don't even understand how small this is. Yeah. I can just tell you that they call it the oocyst.
Oocyst, yep.
4 to 6 micrometers. That is tiny. I can't even comprehend how tiny that is. Obviously, you cannot see that unless you're using a very high-powered microscope. So when people say oh, it's in my drinking water, it's in my tap water, no, you're not going to see it. You're not going to have a clue it's there until you start to pick up the symptoms. And I had Cryptosporidium. One of the very first stool tests I did showed Cryptosporidium and Giardia, which is another common waterborne parasite. And I had lots of issues: diarrhea, skin issues, mood issues, gut pain. Some of the official symptoms may be different than what we actually see clinically, though. We may have people have crazy different issues where it could be insomnia and bloating and joint pain, and we find that they have crypto. But like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, those are kind of the official CDC symptoms. And they do say that if you're especially young or old or have a compromised immune system, that you are at increased risk of life-threatening malnutrition. So you and I were kind of talking off air. Well, what would actually kill somebody? How would you actually die from this? Mainly just you lose all your minerals, and as you mentioned, maybe your heart gets messed up from the mineral loss due to the diarrhea, and then you just die.
Exactly. And then of course, like the big risk factors, extremely young, compromised immune system. Also, if you have AIDS or HIV, right? That's going to be an acquired immune deficiency syndrome. So your immune system is going to be weaker, right? I think official AIDS diagnosis when your T cells drop below 400. So you have to have a weakened immune system just to even be classified with AIDS. So then that's going to compromise your immune system, and then you're open to getting crypto and it being life-threatening. Also, even with people that have AIDS, fungus and candida is a big deal. So those are like huge risk factors. So we got to keep your immune system strong. Those are going to be the biggest things that are going to help you fall prey is a weakened immune system. Now, I find gluten and diet and food allergens are a huge component, because the more you kind of keep your gut kind of inflamed and you make it harder to make enough stomach acid and enzymes, you're creating an environment in your gut that's making it easier for these kind of infections to hang out, right? Hydrochloric acid is important for, one, activating your digestive enzymes to start breaking food down and protein down in the stomach. But think of hydrochloric acid as almost like that your body's internal bleach to keep that area clean, right? High, or should say, increased acid levels make it harder for bacteria and parasites to multiply and grow. Think of it as your body's natural bleach, so to speak, to keep things clean. So the more stressed you are, the more inflamed your gut is, the more you're eating inflamed foods, the more gut permeability you have from other stressors, it's going to make it harder for you to fight off these critters. So when you have a low stomach acid environment, we're also going to have low secretory IgA. And secretory IgA is an immune mucosal barrier. It lines that intestinal tract, and it's that first line of immune defense against invaders. And the more stressed your gut is, the more inflamed your gut is, that IgA level is going to be lower, and you're going to have less internal immune defenses to go after these things.
Yeah, so if we think of my story, use me as the example here as the guinea pig. It would make sense if I had H. pylori first. You know, I had that for probably years based on my symptoms. I did test positive for H. pylori. So as you mentioned, stomach acid's important to neutralize this if you get exposed to it. I was in a hypochlorhydria state, and then I went swimming. You know, I was going over to Lake Austin. I did a little bit of swimming there, and
Lake Austin.
and then I did swimming in Barton Springs. Barton Spring is a spring, you know, it's fresh water. So I think that's probably where I picked it up. So not that it matters, but for our purposes, I think we could classify crypto as maybe like a secondary infection, meaning that you could have a primary H. pylori infection that lowered the stomach acid and the mucosal barrier and created enough inflammation for crypto to thrive. What would you say?
Yes, I think there's three likely scenarios, okay? Scenario number one is you have a compromised immune system from dietary stress, emotional stress, any number of emotional, physical, chemical stressors, and then you get exposed to something, and then that kind of gains a foothold in your body, whether it's H. pylori or crypto, and then that starts to make your immune system get even worse. Then your food allergies get worse. Then your motility gets worse. We know, according to the literature, people that have crypto have a higher likelihood of zinc deficiency. Well, we know how important zinc is for your immune system. We know how important zinc is for your sex hormones, especially if you're a guy, right? Really important for testosterone production. So you can see, all right, now we start to have these nutrient deficiencies come into play, and these nutrient deficiencies are going to make it harder for you to have a healthy immune response, have healthy hormones. That starts to create more symptoms: energy, fatigue, lack of muscle mass, inability to recover and heal. And so then you can see how everything starts to go downward. So you start to have a little bit of a compromised immune system, right? Physical, chemical, and emotional stress buckets getting filled. You get exposed to something, and then that makes more stress and more symptoms occur. And then over time, it escalates and maybe more infections stack on. That's number one. Number two is you just get exposed to a lot of crypto, like a ton. Maybe you drank a whole bunch of water and there was a large bolus of crypto in that water, and that just overwhelmed your immune system in general, even if you were healthy, right? Because I had stories of patients who were super healthy and they just got exposed to a lot of an infectious debris material, whether in water or food, and they just, boom, they were down for the count. Or number three, like we're talking about, you just gradually get exposed to multiple infections over time, and then you kind of have this trophy collection in your gut, kind of like you did, right? You had H. pylori, I think you had crypto, I think you had Giardia, right? I think at one point we nicknamed you or nicknamed your critters the Three Amigos, right? Because you had so many. And I think a lot of people that we see, they're very focused on one infection. They're like, I think I have this. And today we're talking about just one infection, but the bigger picture is a lot of people have more than one infection, and you have the right to have more than one infection, and most people do. So don't be myopically focused on one. We are today, but you may have this and other things, and we have to clear out everything together. And typically we have to set the foundation before it, because people that have inflamed guts, it's hard to go after infections right away. It can be tough.
Yeah, so that's part of the education piece and the testing piece for people. Is they may come to us with this idea of, I've got Blasto or Giardia or H. pylori and crypto. We got to make sure we do good diagnostic workup and make sure we get everything that's there. Because if we just give you herbs for crypto, yes, by accident, we may start to kill other infections off. But in the case of H. pylori, the herbs we use for crypto would be different than H. pylori. So we may not get to the root. We may get one of the root causes, but not the primary one. Let me read a little bit more from the CDC real quick. So they had talked about how the parasite can swim, or it can survive in the water for days and days and days. We don't even know fully how long it can survive. So that's why people say, oh, if you've had diarrhea, don't swim in the pool. And people still do it. And so even trace amounts of infected fecal matter on hands or swimsuits can contaminate the swimming pools, for example. And then it also talks about the resistance, where now the cryptos become resistant to chlorine, and it says some other chemicals. So it doesn't say exactly what other chemicals. I'm guessing maybe bromine, other things related to chlorine that's used to treat the water. So if you go to the pool and it reeks like chlorine, first of all, chlorine's terrible. Please swim in salt water if you have the option. But don't take that as a sense of security. Hey, the pool reeks like chlorine, I'm assuming it's safe. I don't want to create fear, but you don't want to be drinking chlorine water anyway, and you don't really want to swim in it if you have another option like salt water.
Yeah, and just an option too. I have a saltwater pool, and you will have natural chlorines that form with saltwater pool. So there is chlorine that forms, but typically I have someone that helps maintain the pool for me, and I basically instruct that person to use the lowest amount of salt, which will naturally form chlorine, to keep the pool clean without algae forming. So I'm able to keep my pool at maybe a 20% chlorine percentage. I will tell you, most people, my eyes start to get irritated and red, and I can smell it around 40. So I keep mine at around 20, just enough to keep the algae from blooming. And it's enough where I can open my eyes under the water, and I can, smell my clothes afterwards. I don't smell the chlorine, and my eyes aren't irritated. So you can kind of find that happy medium where it's just enough to kill the algae and keep your pool water clean, but just enough where you're not having any irritation with your eyes, and you shouldn't be able to smell it afterwards. So if you have a pool, try to find that happy medium.
Perfect. That's good advice. I'd swim in a neighborhood pool that was completely, chemical, or I guess you would say man-made chlorine. It wasn't like salt water that converted to chlorine. And I felt super bad. I reeked, I smelled, I had a headache afterwards. And then when I went over to a friend's who had a saltwater pool and I swam there, I didn't have any issues. So I don't know if there's any different chemical composition or if chlorine's chlorine, but I do feel better and don't get headaches in saltwater pools versus just straight dumping in chlorine.
Same thing. One, the salt water just naturally feels better on your skin. And then number two, I'm going to be looking at adding a potential laser light to my pool for the main reason of just being able to lower the chlorine content.
Cool.
And again, the more humid the environment is, the more you need actual chlorine there because of the mold growth, right? Mold, or I should say algae, is kind of like mold, right? It needs that higher humidity environment. So as we enter the fall and it gets less humid, you can kind of tampen down the chlorine. So little tangent here, but people, are getting exposed to a lot of toxins in their pool. And on that note, water filtration is going to be really important if you have a crypto exposure. We know in Milwaukee about 25 years ago, 1994, 93, there was a huge outbreak. 500,000 people got exposed because the public water system was not filtering out crypto. So moral of the story there is everyone should have a really good water filtration system, because that's our insurance policy against the public municipality not filtering out things appropriately. And who knows how many other infections are missed. And if you're more immunocompromised and your gut's inflamed, who knows other infections you may be falling prey to, like H. pylori or other things, maybe Giardia. So it's always good to have either a whole house filtration system or at least have a under the counter reverse osmosis system, because that's going to be strong enough, or I should say the filters will be, specific enough to filter all that debris out and keep your water nice and clean.
Yeah. Not that I want to create fear about eating out at restaurants, but people take their health for granted in the sense that if you go to a restaurant, for example, and you eat rice that was cooked using tap water that was contaminated with Crypto or Giardia, you could very well just go to a nice restaurant and do your fancy sushi and go home with Crypto or Giardia.
Yep.
And then same thing with tap water. I would not, you couldn't pay me to drink tap water. You go to a restaurant and everybody looks at me weird because I bring my own filtered water. Oh, you don't need a water, sir? No, I've got water right here. I'm good to go. To me, it's not worth the risk. I've suffered too much when I had gut bugs. So the number you were talking about is crazy. I was looking at it here. The 400,000 people infected was the low number. It could have been up to an estimated 1.6 million people in the Milwaukee area. And then there was another.
I think a handful of people actually died from that outbreak too.
Yeah, I saw a number. I want to say it was like 50 or 60 people.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
I think it was pretty big. But so it's just funny. People, listening in Chicago and Los Angeles and New York and Seattle and, even small towns, like all these people that are using tap water. Let's say you're going to go make some rice and you throw your water in there. Let's just say you didn't get up to a temperature where it's going to kill it off. I don't even know what temperature would kill Crypto. I don't know if you can prove that or not. But let's say you're cooking your rice and it's just at a simmer.
Right.
And then you're listening to our podcast and now you're about to eat that rice that you just cooked. Maybe that has Crypto in it. So I think the whole house filter is great. And then I know you do and I do too. We add extra filtration onto the water that we're actually going to drink. So downstairs in my office, I'm using the Clearly filtered, which is this little pitcher. It basically uses the same technology, kind of similar to a Berkey, but it's just so convenient because I just put it under the sink, which is already filtered, put it into this Clearly filtered, and it's kind of a drip filter. But I do have the Berkey, and then I do have the a Pure Effects one upstairs, which is the one that you convinced me. You're like, man, you're going to get sick of filling up the Berkey. And I did. So then we got the one that's under the sink. So now you just turn on the little spigot, and then it goes through the 3-stage system.
Yeah, I have one under the sink because the reverse osmosis, it's going to be a little bit stronger to filter out, because my whole philosophy is I have a whole house water filtration system. I use Aquasana. If you guys are interested, I only recommend products that I officially use. That's my MO, to be authentic. So justinhealth.com/water. Evan, you may have a link as well. We'll put it down below for any of your listeners. And I use that as a whole house, and that does a really good job. It's primarily carbon-based, so it will get a good chunk of fluoride, not all of it. It will get a lot of chlorine, a lot of pharmaceuticals out. And then I do the reverse osmosis because a whole house reverse osmosis is really expensive. It's much cheaper to do a whole house carbon-based filter that's more like bone char, and then just do a specific reverse osmosis in the kitchen where most of my water is going to be consumed or cooked with. So then I have that extra layer of protection. And then I use filters that have a post-mineral system, so it adds minerals after they've been added back, and then we put a little bit of electrolyte support on the counter, whether it's trace minerals or Redmond's real salt, so we can always pinch a little bit back in to add that water. So that way I have a more specific filtration for my drinking, and then I have a good global filtration for the whole house. And I could still drink out of any faucet in my house, and it would still be really good and taste really good and really clean. But for that extra level of security, we do the RO. And then I typically just stock my work fridge with Topo Chicos. I love Topo Chicos. So I'll do some level of sparkling filtered mineral water. And then if I go out, I'll typically do Pellegrino. I'll ask for a Pellegrino bottle, like you said, Evan, just to make sure that water is extra clean.
Yeah. So also you didn't mention, but that the whole house carbon-based systems, those are also going to help filter out pesticides and herbicides as well.
Yes.
So there's some really cool research on that. It's not 100% once again, but it is a very, very, very important thing, especially if you live in an area where you've got farm runoff that ends up into your municipal supply. Fertilizers and other herbicides will end up in there. You did mention the pharmaceuticals. People don't realize that, but when you turn on your tap, unfortunately, yes, this is happening in a first world country like the US, you're getting blood pressure medications, trace amounts of antidepressants, anti-anxiety drugs, benzodiazepines, heart medications That is all into tap water.
Yes.
So no, you're not being crazy. No, you're not being anal to need this level of filtration. This is the modern world. This is what's happened. Think about the urine. People pee. Where does that urine go? You flush it down the toilet. It goes back to the municipal company. They do some level of filtration just so it doesn't kill you, and then they pump it back to your tap. So we are not being, I mean, I guess we are compared to the average person, but we're not really being above and beyond. This should be the standard level of care for everyone's water in their home, for their family, especially if you're in the shower. You're like, I'm going to brush my teeth in the shower and swallow some tap water through your shower. With the whole house, now you've got a shower filter that's included. You don't have to put a shower filter on. The whole house is already filtered. So
exactly. And I actually have to go change my filters right after this. It's a good reminder for me. So like kind of my standard workup for a patient that's looking to improve their water to, one, avoid cryptoparasites as well as pesticides and drugs and chemicals, is go with the under-the-counter reverse osmosis. It's about $300 to $400. But once you factor in, if you have bottled water already, you're going to pay for itself in 6 months. And then you're going to have the convenience of the under-counter unit is always having that gallon or gallon and a half tank full. The problem with the Berkey or the Alexa Pure, those are ones that I have as well. I still have them for like, hey, power's out, like, hey, you know, a hurricane comes through and you lose water, you can at least put it outside, collect some rain, or just run, you know, general water in the environment through it and clean it. So I like it as an emergency kind of thing, but I had too many days where I forgot to run water through it the night before. And I was like, crap, I have no water for my shake or my, you know, morning drink. And I had to go without. So that's why I like something that's always working in the background. So that's why the under the counter is great. And if you're going to be in a house long-term and you want to make that investment, go with a good whole house, because it's about $1,000, maybe $200 to install, but then you have it in all your guest rooms. If you want to wake up in the middle of the night and you want to drink some water out of, let's say, your bathroom sink, you can still do it, right? It's still going to be clean enough to do it. I wouldn't recommend it being your staple, but you can still do it fine, no problem.
Yeah, and when we were living in a hotel for a while, my daughter was getting a rash because we were getting exposed to very high amounts of chlorine from giving her a bath when we were at the hotel. So luckily, you know, we had brought some of the stuff from home with us, and I brought our Berkey shower filter, and I just filled up the bathtub using the shower filter, and that removed like 99% of the chlorine. And it was amazing because you couldn't smell it anymore. The one I have for the under the counter, it's a little different than the reverse osmosis you have. It's the Pure. So the link is evanbrand.com/pure. The reason I liked it is because it had a non-aluminum based fluoride reduction filter in there, which was pretty cool. And then it was a carbon block. So it still tastes really good, and it still has quite a bit of minerals in it. You can taste it. And then the little clearly filtered one, that one, full disclosure, they gave that one to me for free. So the clearly filtered, the pitcher filter is great, but it's only like $50 or $60. And the link is evanbrand.com/clearwater. And that one is the little handheld, like, hey, you're at the office setting and you run to the bathroom at your office and you keep this water pitcher on your desk for $60, and it's going to be pretty dang clean.
Yeah, and we put all the links down below in the description, guys, and we're only recommending products that we actually use. I've been using a reverse osmosis by Aquasana and Pelican, and they've worked great. I've used them for about 4 or 5 years, and I've had my whole house system for 5 years, so I feel really, really good about it. And just be very mindful, if you do have hard water in your area, you may need to get if you're doing a whole house, you may need to do some kind of a system that softens the water as well, because hard water can kind of clog the filters a little bit faster. So just if you're going to be looking at that, make sure you assess if you have hard water or not. Most people know because you kind of see the mineral residue on a lot of things after the fact. If you do, make sure you factor that in if you're getting a whole house.
All right, I got one more thing to say about water, and then let's move on and talk about lab testing, and then maybe a couple herbs we use to kill crypto. Okay, so the Brita, the Pure, like the PUR brand, anything you can commercially buy at Target, Walmart, etc., those things give you a false sense of security. They are garbage. Yes, a Brita and a Pure and some of these other zero water, yes, they can filter out some heavy metals, lead, mercury, cadmium, arsenic, etc. But in comparisons to the ones we're talking about, you know, we're talking about the little Geo Metro, little Ford Pinto piece of garbage can get you on the highway, but barely, versus like the Lexus of water filtration. There's a huge difference in quality. So I don't want people listening to say, oh, I use my fridge filter. I ask that question on my intake form for every new client. How do you filter your water, if at all? So many people say, I use the filter on my fridge. First of all, that thing is garbage. It's barely going to filter out tiny bit of chlorine and maybe some lead. Secondly, most people don't ever change those things on a regular basis. So in a pinch, if I need to like get a tincture, I'll go to my fridge filter and I'll get a tiny water out of my fridge to take a shot of some herbs. But even then, the whole house filter's already run it before the fridge filter.
Yeah, for the most part, those filters, I call them cosmetic filters because they're just designed to make the water taste and smell just a little bit cleaner. That's it.
Yeah.
But what we're talking about is more at a microscopic level, and it may not fully affect the taste and the flavor. So we want to do both. We want to have the purity, and this is really important because cryptosporidium is the topic of today, and that's going to be the main vector for that for most people is going to be water. So make sure your house is good. If you're someone that's going in a lake or streams or hiking a lot and drinking out of ponds and such, make sure you get a really good, like kind of one of those Berkey travel water bottles that you can run through. That's going to be super helpful. Ideally, bring something with you just to make sure it is super clean. And then I would say if you are getting exposed to water, you should be getting a gut test done at least once a year to evaluate your gut to make sure inflammation's good, to make sure there's no infections, including crypto, and maybe other infections too. And if there are, then we have to create protocols to knock it out. But I'm treating my gut probably twice a year proactively. I only test once a year. I'll test more frequently if I have symptoms. So the most common gut symptom with crypto is going to be diarrhea. The major mechanism of how someone passes from an infection like crypto is they just have too much diarrhea, and then they tend to lose their electrolytes. And then when their electrolytes are gone, then their nervous system's not going to work and their heart's not going to work. So, if you have diarrhea, first thing and best thing you can do is get to an ER to at least get stabilized with a IV. So you can have your electrolytes stabilized, and then you got to get the diarrhea under control. First thing we can do to help with that is going to be activated charcoal. That will at least slow things down. And then depending on what the infection is, we're going to use specific herbs. And you have had great success with herbs in the berberine family, higher dose oil of oregano. There's a great product that I've used for a long time called AP Mag that has some oriental herbs that have been great with crypto. The problem with crypto is it's in the crypts. It's in the crypts of lubricants, which is in the small intestine. So it's burrowed down deeper into the gut lining. So we have to use specific magnesiums to help open up those crypts so these natural herbal antibiotics can get in there and knock the infection down.
Yeah, so just to say it in a different way so it gets into people's heads.
Yep.
So what Justin's talking about is if you were to zoom in on the intestinal tract, you can see these little dips and these little valleys. Mm-hmm. And in the valleys, at the bottom of the valleys where the crypt hangs out, that's how it got the name probably, is hiding in the crypt. And it's hard to get to. It's hard to access that. And so this is why many people have come to us and they say, well, I already went to a naturopath or I already went to this other guy and he did a protocol with me, and we test them and they still test positive for it. It's probably just because they didn't get that deep layer that they needed to access. They just got surface layers. So maybe they threw in like caprylic acid, maybe some coconut extracts, or maybe they just did some oregano oil, maybe enough, but maybe not. So that's why we try to have a pretty big toolbox, and we don't use anti-parasitics. That's one common thing that's said in the internet world is that, well, parasites, you can't get rid of them unless you use anti-parasitic medications like Blastocystis hominis and Giardia and crypto. People say, oh, well, you have to use anti-parasitic drugs. And I will say, I'm firsthand experience, that's not true. And we have lost count of how many infections we've gotten rid of using herbs without prescriptions. I'm not saying it's never needed, but in many countless 99.9% of the cases, we've been able to resolve it.
And here's something interesting. So number one, we know that the fecal oral component's really big, right? And guess what? Your typical sanitizer, right? Your gel sanitizer is not going to kill crypto. So you really have to wash your hands. You have to do a good job doing it. You can't rely on some gel to do it because it's not going to be able to do it. Number two is your symptoms can actually be resolved when you have crypto during treatment, and you could still be spreading or contagious with crypto in your stool for weeks after your symptoms have ended. So this is really important. And I would postulate, having seen many patients, dozens, if not hundreds with crypto, there are a lot of people that have this subclinical type of in-between where they're not like full-on diarrhea and acute, which then would need, extra electrolytes, maybe an IV. Maybe they would be on an antibiotic right away because of the severity of their diarrhea. And the typical antibiotic we use will be nitazoxanide or Alinea, which is a good antibiotic, but has a lot of side effects. So I always like to jump on the herbals if we can first, but you could be contagious for weeks or months afterwards. So you have to be very careful, and you have to make sure you're looking at other infections that could be layered in with the crypto. Like in Evan's case, we talked about the three amigos. He had crypto, blasto, and H. pylori. And
Giardia.
That's a common. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Crypto, blasto, and Giardia, that's common, seeing a layer of infections, which could be keeping your immune system more compromised for sure.
Yeah, I never had blasto. I just had crypto, Giardia, and H. pylori. Those are my three.
Exactly. So Alinea or nitazoxanide is the big one. The typical protocol is a 3-day protocol, but I'll tell you with Alinea, most people are doing at least 2 weeks with that. They're doing about 1,000 milligrams twice a day. And again, you're not going to be able to use that in children. You'll have to see your gastro doc for a recommendation for children. But we typically use herbals, and there's a bunch of different herbs that we layer on. So I mentioned the AP Mag. I mentioned some of the broad spectrum herbs. In my line, I'm using GI Clear 4 frequently with parasites as a base, because it's very high in golden seal. It's very high in black walnut. Also, I always like adding a little bit of lymph support in my herbals. So I'll do a lot of burdock and or ginger, because those are going to really help the lymphatic system. And the lymph tends to get really congested when there's a whole bunch of stuff being killed in your body, right? The lymph is that interplay transport between the blood and the tissue. We want to make sure that's moving appropriately. So if you have to get treated acutely, fine. Go to your MD or your gastro. If it's kind of a chronic long-term thing, then you want to work with someone like Evan or I and get a good herbal protocol dialed in and get all the foundational stuff worked in before it. So go to the 6 R's, remove the bad foods, replace the enzymes, acids, repair the gut lining, calm down the inflammation. We're typically getting people on some level of adrenal support or hormone support, depending on what kind of imbalances are present. And then in the 4th R, we come in and work on removing the infection. So 5th R, repopulation, reinoculation, and 6th R, retest to ensure it's gone, because it is so infectious. And if you have crypto, you definitely want to get at least your significant other or spouse assessed, because of how easy it is to spread. And if you're someone that's cooking a lot of the food in the house, you more than likely want to get any kids looked at, especially if they're symptomatic, for sure.
Yeah, we've seen whole families with the similar bugs. It's kind of interesting. I really enjoy looking at the kids and looking at mom or dad, vice versa, and seeing how often the bugs are shared. We would say about 90% of the time, the bugs are shared between people. Now, the question then becomes, okay, well, he just mentioned berberine and blah, blah, blah. Well, can I just have my husband or wife or kids do those herbs? The answer is maybe. But do you really want to guess? And then you give them the herbs and then they have a reaction or something doesn't go as planned, and now they've got headaches and a skin rash popped up, and maybe you're killing too much off and the liver's not supported, or the lymphatic system, as you mentioned, is not supported enough. So it's really better to create a synergistic protocol. Sometimes we'll have people ask us, hey, well, can you just prioritize this protocol? Whether it's an issue with they don't want to take pills, or, it's a budgetary issue. They're like, hey, I just want to take one thing. Mm-hmm. And then we have to go back to them and say, there is no one thing. You can't just do one silver magic bullet for this. You really have to support lymphatics, adrenals. You talked about the hormonal support in the beginning with the zinc and all of that. You've got to have everything on board. You can't just kill because you're going to feel like crap. And then guess what happens? You're not compliant. So you only handled 4 days of trying to kill something, and that wasn't enough to get rid of the infection, and then you still feel bad. So it's really better to just have a full protocol made for you based on your results. You don't want to assume I just have crypto, so I'm going to go take berberine because Justin said berberine's helpful. You really want to get the data.
And my general recommendation is, if the spouse or significant other has great health, may not be as necessary to test. It's always our top goal. If they have great health, we still would treat with generalized herbal protocol anyway. But if there's any lingering symptoms at all, then testing is good. And there's always a chance of a false positive, or false negative, I should say, meaning you came back negative, but you're really positive. So that's why I always treat no matter what, just because, I don't want to spread anything back and forth, right? Someone's going to do fine on an herbal protocol. They're not going to actually get worse if their health's pretty good. And I'm more worried about the primary patient coming in and getting reinfected because they came back false negative. So we always keep that in the back of our head as an option.
Yeah. So my daughter, for example, we did our first stool test when she was 2. I don't have it right in front of me, but I know she showed up with some parasite. I think she had either Cyclospora, which could also be waterborne, or Blasto. Can't recall exactly, but we used a protocol for that. We retested her. Then she showed up with H. pylori and a handful of virulence factors, 4 or 5 virulence factors. We're like, whoa. So then we got rid of that, and then we retested again, and then she had a bunch of bacterial overgrowth and candida. So then we worked on that, and then now all of her symptoms are gone. I didn't do another retest. I probably could have, just to say, hey, look, we've knocked the bacteria down. But we looked at skin, we looked at stool, we looked at sleep, and everything is good. So we stopped testing. But in some cases, it takes 2, 3, 4 tests to really make sure that you can actually get rid of this thing.
Totally makes sense. So I think we hit all the big things. So testing, I'm typically running a GI map and or a 401H to assess this. That's the big one. With all the diet stuff, we're cutting all the inflammation down. We're working through the 6 R's, like I mentioned. We're cleaning up water. We're looking at the environment. I think you mentioned earlier, or maybe you didn't mention it, we talked about it in the pre-show, is the Lincoln Memorial Pond, I think.
Oh, yeah. We should talk about this.
2 years ago, they had to drain that whole entire Lincoln Monument Pond in D.C. because I think 80 geese or ducks died of Cryptosporidium. So, this is a serious issue. So we want to make sure we're on top of it, and we're always testing it and assessing it in our patients.
Yeah, it was weird. A lot of the articles just referred to parasites, and I don't even know if they know exactly what it was. There was one mention. They thought it could have been this parasite that comes from snails, but I don't know if they ever even proved it. There was some type of a snail-borne parasite. It was a weird name, like Bilharzia, and it was like a blood fluke, some type of a trematode. But it's tough. It's tough to prove. And I would say in most cases, contaminated water is never going to have just one bad guy. So it was probably a bunch of stuff. But yeah, here you go thinking, oh, look at this beautiful water. You don't know what's in there. So don't go swimming in the Lincoln Memorial.
Exactly. Or any other public type of fountains or monuments, those kind of things. You're much better off if you're going to do it, swim in a public lake or ocean. There's still a risk factor there. But hey, I do that frequently, and I just get tested, and I make sure I'm on certain protocols every now and then to help keep it under wraps.
And you keep a lot of herbs on hand. I mean, you and I talked about, we did a show on food poisoning not too long ago where you had gotten sick, and luckily you had some herbs available. So boom, you jump right on them and you were back in action pretty quickly.
Exactly. And who knows what I got. I think my son may have even gotten crypto as well. He just had massively loose stools, but I was able to get him on a protocol. And within 2-3 days, he solidified everything. We had him on activated charcoal to slow down the diarrhea. But most importantly, people that start having this really insane diarrhea, you have to get on extra mineral support. If you can't, you need an IV. But ideally, you're on some kind of trace mineral support in the water. I don't recommend doing the Pedialyte because there's too much crap in there and high fructose corn syrup and colors and dyes. You can just get a really good trace mineral support formula without all the extra sugar, or even use a little bit of coconut water too. That's fine. And that's going to be a great way to get some extra electrolytes, essentially nature's natural Gatorade, so to speak.
Yep, well said. And so if you are out with your kids and they're swimming in a little kiddie pool and some other kid's got a big diaper full of poop, you probably want to get your kid out of that kiddie pool.
Yep, exactly. Yep, 100%, man. And that's the problem when you go to these pools. They have to have the chlorine up so bloody high to compensate for all this stuff. And that way you get the chlorine is like at 70 or 80% and your eyes come out stinging and you smell like chlorine for 2 days afterwards coming out in your sweat. So not a big of those situations for sure, but much rather choose a public lake or anything over that. But so I think we went over some pretty good options, risk factors. We talked about ways to prevent, ways to treat. We talked about, assessing over guessing. We really want to make sure we assess it. And you really want to make sure you're seeing a good comprehensive functional medicine doctor that can walk you through it. So if you guys need help or you want to assess and make sure that crypto isn't a part of your life, head over to justinhealth.com to schedule with myself. You can also head over to evanbrand.com and schedule with Evan. We see patients all over the world. Anything else, Evan, you want to add today?
I would just say crypto doesn't discriminate. So if you hear this, you're like, driving your nice car in LA and you're looking at palm trees. You're like, oh, I'm fine. There's no crypto here. Yes, there is. This affects people around the world. You didn't have to go to Costa Rica or Mexico or Bali or Indonesia or anywhere to get exposed to this stuff. I have not been out of the U.S. at the time of this recording, and I had tons of gut bugs. So this stuff is right here in the good old United States of America. So don't think that because where you live, you're immune. It's just not true.
That's probably the biggest myth that conventional medicine puts out there, or perpetrates, so to speak, is they kind of make it seem like you have to go to all these crazy places. You have to go to Indonesia or Bali or India to get some of these infections. And yeah, you're at much higher risk going there, especially there's different food and natural bacteria and things in there. So your immune system is more likely to be compromised or be sensitive, but you can get it here too. So I hope today's podcast, elucidated some of the major mechanisms and how we can get there. Big thing is you collect multiple critters over time. Your immune system get compromised. Number 2 is you get exposed to a lot of the infectious debris at once. Or number 3, you have a lot of other inflammation and stressors in your gut, and then a small amount is enough to kind of gain a foothold and create a problem. So I hope that makes sense. And if anyone has issues with crypto or gut issues, put your comments down below. We'd love to know what your experience was, what you did, what happened. And if you enjoyed this podcast, give us a share, a thumbs up. We really appreciate it. Sharing is caring. Evan, anything else?
Yeah, the one last thing. We talk about, okay, why does everybody in the U.S., how can they still get exposed to this? Because the food supply is now international. I just bought some organic blueberries from Whole Foods, and they were from Peru. And a previous time I had bought them, they were from Chile. And, previous times they're from other countries. So the whole food supply is international now. So another reason to try to go local, go to your farmers markets and buy food there, because you may live in your perfect house and everything's cool in your city, but all of your fruit and produce and even your meat, for example, could be coming from Brazil and other places. So, so you're not immune. And if you have issues, please reach out. We're here. So Justin gave you the websites. I'll give it to you again. Just make sure you're clear. JustinHealth.com and EvanBrand.com. And we'll talk with you all again real soon.
Hey, Evan, today was great, man. You have an awesome day.
You too. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.